Lexie Natasha tweeted and was just saying a bunch about pride and how proud she was of this team. Have you kind of had similar emotions the last couple of days, and how do you balance that with it? Very painful.
Nobody in the NBA or WNBA anticipated it. A player who secretly feared and doubted every stroke she made. That she would be released today, having hardly been able to clinch a berth on the squad during her first 2 seasons. Then, practically overnight, everything changed. In addition to seeing the most significant shift in women's. One of the most intriguing tales in basketball history is that of Lexie Hull. Now, after experiencing the Caitlin. After years of storming, Clark has now spoken out about what it's been like. Not the polished media portrayal, but the genuine one. Before any of this made sense, she disclosed something that no one quite anticipated hearing. Additionally, you must comprehend Lexie Hull's situation prior to Caitlin Clark entering Gainbridge Fieldhouse. In the 2022 draft, Hull was selected by the Indiana Fever with the 6th overall pick. It seems like a fantasy on paper. 6th place overall, top 10 options, a Stanford graduate with 3 All-Pac-12 choices, a national title. Received the Class and Elite 90 awards for her exceptional academic and athletic achievement during her last season. This was meant to be the beginning, but instead it became a grind that most outsiders never really noticed. Due to the bad Fever in those early years, it wasn't nearly as excellent. They experienced losing seasons and missed the playoffs completely, placing them among the league's weakest clubs. However, Hull had to fight. Every night was crucial in order to be on the squad, which is a situation that no young player wants to be in. Every item has a negative meaning. She was aware that she was displaying fear. During her first 2 seasons, she averaged fewer than 5 points a game. Despite playing over 20 minutes each night in her second season, she only scored 4.6 points. The figures are accurate. She was being held back by something, which Hull would eventually identify. She talked about those early years in public, something that few athletes ever do. See what she told Glamour magazine. There were times when I thought I may be benched or cut if I didn't shoot. Someone with exceptional credentials, a top 10 draft pick and a Stanford graduate are both awake, really afraid that one. The reality of being on a losing team with nothing to soothe the pain was that a missed shot may ruin their careers. According to her, those early years were extremely nerve-wracking since there was little margin for error, no playoffs, and a losing culture. Everything mattered because the stakes were too great to overcome. Additionally, that type of pressure has an effect on more than just your shot. It enters your mind and alters how you move, think, and breathe while playing. However, something occurred that altered not just Lexie Hull's career but the entire course of the franchise. And possibly the entire American women's basketball scene. Hull was being stifled, and the Fever was going unnoticed. Caitlin Clark was chosen as the first overall pick in the 2024 WNBA draft by the Indiana Fever. Here is a brief synopsis of Caitlin Clark's persona at the time, in case you need a reminder. Regardless of gender, the most decorated scorer in NCAA basketball history. A player who helped elevate Big Ten women's basketball to a must-see event, broke records dating back decades, and turned Iowa Hawkeye games into national televised activities. The WNBA as a whole was going to experience the unprecedented level of interest surrounding her. It was genuine and authentic for a women's basketball player, solidifying her place as the most significant player in the league. By her initial campaign's unprecedented fan participation and output, all of a sudden, the Indiana Fever became the most talked about, contentious, and well-regarded WNBA team. Everywhere they went, the spectators were sold out. National broadcasts and a media frenzy. Lexie Hull witnessed it all while Caitlin Clark was sporting the Indiana Fever shirt. The impact Caitlin Clark has had on her colleagues is rarely discussed. There were other variables besides visibility. There were other considerations than larger crowds, sponsorship deals, and the cameras that followed them. According to Lexie Hull, the main distinction is what takes place inside the lines during a game. Something that, unless you know what you're searching for, is practically invisible. Caitlin Clark has a different perspective on the floor compared to nearly everyone who has ever played this game. She has a fantastic idea for the court. Her passing is exceptional. Coaches are particularly inspired by the way she draws defenders. Open perimeter shooters with no barriers in their way. For someone like Lexie Hull, who had spent 2 years torturing herself over each shot attempt, it was absolutely freeing. Hull's portrayal of the shift assumes a new meaning when you consider what before it. When Clark arrived, she confidently declared, "I know I'm going to get open shots, but since I've worked hard to prepare myself for this, I don't have to worry about whether they go in or not. And I'll accept the result." That's freedom. The figures back the kind of freedom that is only possible when the pressure valve is eventually opened. In 2024, Hull's three-point shooting percentage was 47%. 1%. It was a career best and one of the league's most successful shooting outings that year. Those looks led to her three-point percentage returning to 36.7%, exactly where she had previously been in college to Clark's death. The numbers convey the story even more powerfully than the words. However, the court wasn't the only location where things changed. At this point, the story becomes much more captivating. This is because Lexie Hull and Caitlin Clark's off-court relationship sparked debate, attracted media attention. It became one of the most discussed subjects in women's sports. Many were genuinely worried about how Clark would adapt to a locker room full of strangers. She had played with Gabby Marshall during her 4 years at Iowa, and Kate Martin, her childhood co-workers. She became the brand's new face when she moved to Indiana. The worry was genuine. Would she blend in nicely in a place where everyone else had already made connections? Would the current players welcome her, or would her attention offend them? And this is what actually took place. She and Lexie Hull fell in love almost instantly. By the end of that first season, they were hanging out off the court in Indianapolis. They were sharing content on TikTok, experimenting with different beverages, and giggling as though they had been friends for many years. During the Olympic break, the WNBA visited Mexico. The relationship was undeniable, and people loved it. But by 2025, the dynamic had grown to such an extent that it had a completely new name. In the off-season prior to the 2025 season, Sophie Cunningham was transferred to Indiana, turning what had been a duet into a trio. Clark, Hull, and Cunningham began referring to themselves as the Trace Leches, and their joint endeavors produced some of the league's most popular and hilarious content. Hull and Cunningham were Clark's prominent caddies at an LPGA Pro-Am competition. They were constantly making fun of each other on social media. When Clark shared pictures from Fever Media Day on Instagram, Hull made fun of his lack of sun exposure with the comment, "We are so back." Hull told People magazine that Clark would also benefit from some sun exposure in one of the off-season's funniest remarks. It was the kind of taunting that only occurs in friendships when. Additionally, it provided the WNBA fan base with a close-up view of the players' comfort level. Personalities, something they had never truly encountered before. Hull stated that Clark would be present at her wedding, which has been scheduled since Hull and Pittsburgh Pirates outfielder Will Matt were engaged in April 2025. Matson was a brilliant baseball player at Stanford when they first met, and he was selected in the 6th round of the 2019 MLB draft. He moved to Indianapolis after quitting baseball due to a string of illnesses to be with Hull, which speaks volumes about the foundation of her existence. Hull made the decision to confront a side of playing with Caitlin Clark in a way that the majority of individuals in her circumstances would have ignored or completely avoided, even though everything has been friendly and happy, and it's the aspect of this tale that merits the greatest focus. It was one of the most turbulent seasons in the history of the WNBA took place in 2025. Hull characterized Clark's arrival as having a particular mentality, a solemnity, focus, and edge that implied she was prepared to rule and had completed. However, Hull informed reporters prior to the season that Clark had clearly changed in his second year. Hull claims that it's obvious that she's here and prepared to conduct business. Initially, that read seemed to be perfect. Hull was playing the best basketball of her career during the first 7 games of 2025, averaging more than 10 points each contest. Finally, the Fever appeared to be a cohesive squad, as they led the WNBA in three-point percentage at 55.6%. Then the injuries began. Clark missed a lot of games due to a quad problem. Next, there was a problem with the groin. A second soft tissue issue ensued. On July 15, when playing the Connecticut Sun, in just a few months, Clark suffered his 4th injury, which led to one of the most devastating pictures of the season. Clark appeared to be suppressing her tears as she got off the ground and rested her forehead on the hoop framework, and after giving it her best and witnessing everything come to pass, she slumped on the bench with a towel over her face. And Lexie Hull was seated next to her, as a true friend does when words fail to describe how they feel. Hull subsequently discussed Clark's leadership position at the moment in an honest manner. Why me? She was upset that her body would not comply despite putting in more effort than anybody else in the building. This was a challenging phase. The Fever triumphed despite Clark missing a large portion of the season. They persevered all the way to the WNBA semifinals, defeating the eventual champion Las Vegas Aces in a crucial Game 5 that required overtime. Before to Indiana's final defeat. Hull's two-way perseverance was a major factor in the run. which isn't apparent in a box score, taking command, making plays that kept games close when the team needed them, and protecting the top perimeter scorer on the opposing side every single night. She couldn't stop thinking about something. Things she ultimately determined the world should be aware of. After the October 2025 Women of the Year article in a stunning magazine, Lexie Hull decided to quit exercising caution when making remarks. She was one of 5 players highlighted in the journal, with the Sabali sisters and Nafisa Collier-Jones. The title was fitting. For someone who had subtly emerged as one of the league's most esteemed players, however, the parts of that interview that gained popularity on the internet had nothing to do with her engagement, attire, or basketball accomplishments. Hull made it clear that, due to the media attention, it focused on the disadvantages of fighting against the most well-known female athlete. I think there is some jealousy among the people who have stood by us since Caitlin came over the fever. On its own, that would have been sufficient to generate headlines. But then she went farther, stating that instead of conjecture or outside speculations, the fever has heard what other clubs have to say. According to Hull, teams and athletes in different locker rooms stating they can't let the fever prevail. The goal is real, and each team puts forth extra effort. This is true when they play Indiana. Since Clark's arrival, Hull has been at the heart of her response to everything is fascinating because of what she chose to do with it. She didn't express any complaints. She leaned in instead of seeming like a victim. It's acceptable if something beyond our control gives you more. Hull said, "Great if that's what it takes for you guys to come and put in extra effort to defeat us. Everyone should think they are getting the best from everyone other. I think we do. Get everyone else's best." Managing one of the most controversial situations in women's sports. In an exceptionally composed manner. Yes, because Caitlin Clark draws interest from non-fans, cameras, and sponsorship agreements. It also includes rivals who designate each Indiana game as a playoff game. Game on the schedule. Referees are monitored. Every move a Fever player makes is examined, recorded, discussed, and used as a weapon by people who have never been to a professional basketball arena.